As rhetoric between Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S. grows tenser by the minute, concerns about Europe's energy dependence on Russia have further added to the web of economic and diplomatic interests currently complicating negotiations. 40% of the European continent relies on Russian gas imports to heat their homes and businesses, with Germany, one of our closest allies, at the forefront. Now, much of that gas travels from Russia to mainland Europe through pipelines running through, you guessed it, Ukraine.
According to Marine veteran and Officer Lucas Kunce, who represented the U.S. in arms negotiations with Russia during his time at the Pentagon, this dysfunctional dependence means that while Germany has pledged to act in lockstep with the U.S. when it comes to a possible Russian invasion, its leaders have a vested economic interest in keeping Putin happy.
Afghanistan veteran and U.S. Senate candidate from Missouri, Lucas Kunce, joins us now to break down the situation. Glad to have you with us.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, guys.
So obviously, yeah, the pipeline matters a lot. Does this mean that, the actual European forces involved in this, they have different incentives than the U.S.? So while you're saying while they, might publicly say, yes, rah, rah, America, they're on board, what they're actually thinking is like, no, this is not great. Let's not go to war over this.
Yeah, what we're seeing here is this big frenzy, in D.C. and in the news talking about an invasion in Ukraine by Russia. And, I did arms control negotiations with Russia. I've sat across the table from Russia. I've been to NATO and tried to get our allies on board to take hard positions against these guys. And what nobody is talking about right now is the fact that this invasion, it's funded by Western European countries and their gas purchases from Russia. And the people who they expect to, pick up the tab is, is U.S. treasure and Ukrainian blood, right? They're funding this, but they're funding Russian aggression, but they're not willing to pay the cost of protecting against it. And that's really what we need to focus on preventing from happening again.
So what does that mean? So if we take that into consideration, what policy would result from that?
We need to start investing in the next generation of energy right here in America, and we need to start doing it today. Whatever people are talking about doing in Ukraine right now, that's like putting a Band-Aid on a cancer ulcer. It doesn't change the problem. It doesn't change the fact that Western Europe is funding Russia's military modernization. They're funding their misadventures overseas and in other countries. They are funding the nuclear weapons that Russia is pointing at the United States. Again, they're paying for that, and they're expecting the U.S. to cover the cost of defending against it. And so what we need to do today is start investing in that next generation of energy right here in middle America, create a ton of good jobs, boost our economy, export that energy to Europe, and say, if you want our defense, then you're going to buy our energy, you're going to do this energy, and you're not going to continue funding Russian aggression.
Do you think, though, that Russia is really all that threatening to Europe? I mean, I get the sense from the European countries that they don't really feel like they're worried so much about an old USSR-style expansion and aggression towards wanting to invade into Europe. I mean, Ukraine's not a member of NATO. We do have to remember that. As much as there's talk about them joining, they're not currently a member. So Europe has no obligation to join us in a potential fight with Russia over Ukraine. So do you really feel like Europe is even caring, quite frankly, and that perhaps continuing this escalating rhetoric is only alienating us even more from our European allies?
So what I learned when I was doing these arms control negotiations at NATO and then with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is the closer you get to Russia, the more worried about it. And the further you are from Russia, the more you don't worry about Russia. You're happy to buy their gas. You're happy to fund their aggression against the other countries because you think you're getting a good deal. And so you're going to be more silent. And so, we tried, like I said, I tried over and over again to get these NATO countries, some of our allies, on board to take hard positions against Russian aggression. And they wouldn't do it because they are addicted to that gas. And, frankly, since the invasion in 2014 began of Russia invading Ukraine, they've gotten more addicted not less. And so like what we need to remember, though, is that they are asking us to station more troops in Europe. We have more troops there than we've had in a very long time. We continue to open more bases closer to Russia and in other countries and stuff like that. And we are picking up the tab so that they can feel safe and so that they don't have to worry about Russia. And again, the real shame here is that they're the ones who are creating the Russian aggression by funding it. And so again, like the real solution here is not to talk about what the current on the ground situation is. The real solution is to change the entire system, change the entire dynamic so that we don't ever have to worry about this again.
But is it really the European countries that are asking for us to put more troops in Europe, or is it Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine is part of Europe, and there are a lot of other European countries besides, say, France, Germany, and Italy who use the most of the gas. And yes, they do want us there. I mean, I would go to these NATO negotiations, and Poland, for example, invited U.S. troops, wanted to open a big base there. There are a bunch of treaties that make it harder to put troops in certain places in Europe. Russia violates all of them, and we can't get Russia or Germany or France to say anything about it. But yes, there are a lot of countries in Europe who are inviting us there. The people who enjoy the status quo may not be as loud about it, like Germany, France, Italy, because they're using all that gas. But they want us there defending because, again, they're getting the benefit of this situation from every single direction, right? They feel safe because we're going to protect them, and they get the energy that they want cheaper because they can buy it from Russia and not worry about the consequences.
And is Russia selling? Are there nice deals that Russia is giving to some of those countries in order to create this relationship?
I mean, they're all a good deal if it's if it heats your home, if it keeps your power plant going, and it's affordable, right? And gas is affordable right now, and so like the reason it's affordable though is because there are all these external costs that these countries aren't having to pay, and so like one of those external costs is paid by the United States. It's us putting a lot of troops over there, modernizing our own equipment, building a next generation of nuclear modernization. That's going to cost us $1 trillion to provide them a nuclear umbrella. Like there are all these costs that go with that gas that they don't pay because other people pay it. I mean, you're going to look at a lot of Ukrainian blood potentially spilled. A lot has already been spilled, and that's a cost that someone else is paying for their gas. And so if the United States is going to pay this high cost, then I say that instead of paying that cost in warfare, in weapons, in troops stationed overseas, I think we should pay the cost of European energy by creating good jobs right here in middle America, where we're strapped for good jobs and our economy is hurting, and export that energy to Europe and have them use that instead.
But no matter how you, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No, I just wanted to underscore something. You said you briefly mentioned this $1 trillion nuclear modernization, which I think a lot of people just have no idea is even happening. Like this is the beauty of bipartisanship in Washington. Bipartisan presidencies, bipartisan Congress is spending, like you said. Talk about what they're doing with this nuclear modernization program.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically upgrading nuclear weapons that are falling apart. But it's part of this great scheme where there's always enough money for warfare and for weapons, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I watched us spend $6.4 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Iraq was about this very same thing, right? It was about oil. And so, I mean, and don't pretend like it wasn't. Like when I was there, we'd have a joke where, we'd be sitting around and be like, oh, why are we here again? Oh, yeah, oil. And like Alan Greenspan had said it, Donald Rumsfeld had said it, the general in charge of CENTCOM had said it. Like everyone knew we were there for oil. We spent trillions of dollars there. And, looking back, if we had spent that money instead of trying to pursue oil that we didn't even get, if we had spent it on changing the way that we create energy here in America, we wouldn't have to be worrying about Russia right now. And my big worry here is that we continue, we're going to do something with Ukraine, or we're going to do something with the next country that has to do with petrochemicals or whatever else. And again, in 20 years, we're going to look back and say, wow, I wish we had spent that money on building the next generation of energy right here in America instead, because then we wouldn't have this problem. And so what we need to do is we need to break this status quo mindset that has us entirely hooked on keeping the hydrocarbon economy going and not breaking out of it and creating those good jobs here.
I just don't know. I mean, no matter how you slice it, I understand what your point is, and that you say, well, we've got to do it here and create the jobs here, and then we'll export it over to Europe. But I mean, come on. There's no way that us exporting natural gas all the way from North America to Europe is going to be cheaper than anything Russia can provide. So if we were to do that and go that route, no matter what, we're going to be spending money subsidizing that natural gas for Europe in order to keep them dependent on us rather than Russia. It doesn't make financial sense for the American taxpayer. Seems to me the easiest way to get over to counter Russian aggression right now is to stop mean mugging them about NATO, about putting Ukraine in NATO. What are your thoughts on that? Why don't we just say we're not going to add Ukraine to NATO? It seems so simple.
So I'm not talking about doing liquefied natural gas or whatever else here. I'm talking about solar, wind, concentrated solar, the next generation of energy. You know, fission, maybe we're looking at more nuclear, safer nuclear. We're looking at things that don't compete with Russia on gas. Okay, what I'm talking about is getting off of a hydrocarbon economy. Like when we're in the Marine Corps, we're taught that the best thing you can do is asymmetric warfare. And, you know, like Sun Tzu said, the greatest acme of a general is winning a battle before it's ever fought. And so what I'm talking about is changing the landscape of this battle, taking it away from oil, making Russian oil completely irrelevant in the economy so that we don't have to worry about it again. And when people say, oh, it's not going to be cost effective, again, you're not taking into account the amount of money we spend in the Middle East on oil. We're not taking into account the fact that the United States of America funds keeping the Straits of Hormuz open in the Persian Gulf with you know the Fifth Fleet and all this other stuff, all this activity down there, and 76% of that oil goes to Asia, much of which goes to China. Like, we are funding a global economy that doesn't work for us. We're spending a ton of money that's not counted in the overall total. And so what I'm saying is, instead of spending money on that, we spend that money investing right here in America so that we can get the edge, we can get the technological edge on the future of energy, we can create the new jobs here, and it's actually going to save us money in the long term because we don't have to worry about defending a status quo economy that actually does not work for America.
Yeah. We're subsidizing oil by being at war on behalf of it.
Right.
Essentially.
Patrolling everything around the globe. Yeah, exactly. So, Lucas, around this time last year, you were featured in the American Prospect for an article where you made the national security case for clean energy, citing the longtime drive for cheap oil as the principal driver of the United States military misadventures in the Middle East. I'd recommend people check that out. But you're right that that never gets factored into the cost of our fossil fuel economy, our hydrocarbon economy, keeping the Straits of Hormuz open, all of different wars, whether it's in Yemen, Ukraine, or elsewhere. How is this resonating on the campaign trail? Because this is a kind of different way, I think, to talk about clean energy and foreign policy.
Yeah, so one of the pillars of my campaign is something that I call the Marshall Plan for the Midwest. And so it's modeled after World War II. We did the Marshall Plan in Europe. We invested billions of dollars at the time in rebuilding the European economy after that war. And, in Iraq and Afghanistan, again, I watched us spend $6.4 trillion over there. People in my unit were killed. We lost a lot of lives. We didn't do anything worthwhile. And that money went towards nothing. But we spent it nation building over there. And so, what I want to do is nation build right here in our own country, nation build right here in Missouri, where, we've been facing economic warfare from Wall Street, the coast, big business for the last 40 years. And we're hurting, and we have a great opportunity here to come back, rebuild middle America, and do it in a way that helps our national security, that makes our country stronger, that creates good jobs, and that makes everybody, here have a better life. And so when I go around Missouri, what I see over and over and over again from Democrat, Republican, Independent, you name it, is this idea that no matter what I do, no matter who I vote for, I never have any power. The status quo reigns. The people buying off our politicians on both sides have control over an economy that doesn't work for me, and they make my life worse, not better. And so what we're doing in this campaign is running on fundamentally changing who has power in the country. We're not taking any money from fossil fuel executives, pharmaceutical executives, lobbyists, big tech executives. There's a whole range of people we're not taking money from, no corporate PACs, because we want to represent the everyday people who deserve better than they've been getting by these status quo elites who want to do things like go to war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, etc., to protect an economy that works for them but that doesn't work for everybody else. And that's exactly what people here in Missouri want. They want to fundamentally change who has power because they know that the system is rigged and it's not working for them.
Lucas Kunce, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Tomorrow on Rising, Brianna Joy Gray will be with us to break down the big news of the day, as well as Amy Tarkanian and Michael Starr Hopkins for our Rising panel.
And Marianne Williamson will join us to discuss her efforts in backing non-corporate candidates in Democratic primaries.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a video, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.
See you then.